From the beautiful campus of Iowa Western Community College, the Media Studies and Culinary Arts programs, along with CBTV 17, presents Reiver Recipes. Here's your host, Chef Gino.
Hi, I'm Gene Cammarota, chef instructor at Iowa Western Community College, and welcome back to Reiver Recipes. It's been a long time, a lot of things have happened, but we're still cooking. One of our goals here is to help you to feel comfortable preparing your own food. And one of the things that's important in proper food preparation is proper tools. And of course, it starts with the knife. We talked a little bit about where our good knives come from Switzerland and Germany. This particular knife is from Switzerland. And we also talked about how the blade goes from here to here. Today, as I promised in the past, I'm going to show you how to sharpen a knife effectively. In order to sharpen a knife, you need a sharpening stone. This is a sharpening stone. This is actually a three-sided sharpening stone. It has a coarse edge, a medium edge, and a fine edge to sharpen with. I myself just use the coarse edge. Some people like to put a lot of oil onto the stone. I don't like any oil at all. A little oil is fine, but not too much. So if you are going to sharpen a knife, you use a stone, and you want to get a 15 to 20 degree angle. So what I do is I start with 90, and then go half of that is 45, and then I figure about a third of that is 15. I can really tell if I have the right angle by the sound. But what I want to do is I want to start from the heel of the knife and just slowly come across the stone. And it doesn't take a whole lot of swipes if you have a good knife. I'm going to give it 3 swipes, maybe 4, and then I'm going to take a look at it, and I could see, along with my fingerprints, there's a nice edge on the knife right there. On the tip, I can see that it's not quite as pronounced, so I'm going to go back and spend a little extra time sharpening the tip of the knife, because I have a tendency to use that more. And I'm going to go all the way from the heel to the tip. Some knives have what's called a bolster right here, which is a raised piece of metal, which makes it a little more difficult to do, but we don't have a bolster on this knife. So you can see there's a nice little edge on the knife right there. And then I'm going to turn it over and do the exact same thing the other way. I'm not as good left-handed as I am right-handed, but I'm going to take my time. I'm keeping the knife straight. I don't want to flick it at the end. I want to just keep it straight. And again, I said I can tell by the sound if I have the right angle with the knife. It's almost like a tuning fork. But again, I'm going to take a look at the edge and see how it looks. And again, I'm going to spend a little extra time with the tip here. So now, if you look at a knife under a microscope this way, the knife has little tiny teeth that are like this. And as you sharpen it, they come to a point, and that's what makes a knife sharp. So that's what we use the stone for. So now, after we've sharpened the knife, I'm going to try to take most of the metal off. But this is called a steel. This is not to sharpen a knife. This is to hone the edge of your knife. So you use the same 15 degree angle. This is a thumb guard. So I always put my thumb guard behind it so I don't cut it. And then I just take the knife at a 15 degree angle and go like this. And that makes the knife super sharp. One of the things I failed to mention was, if you go like this with the knife, you must go like this with the knife to get the teeth to line up. If you want to sharpen a knife this way, it's okay, but when you flip it over, you must do the same thing. If you don't have a 3-sided stone like I do, you don't need one. You could just use a 1-sided stone, obviously. If you're afraid to sharpen your own knives, if you go to any butcher at any store where they cut meat and ask nicely, they will probably sharpen your knife for you. I want to make sure my knife is clean at this point. One of the things about this steel is it's magnetic. So when I go like this, any minute metal shavings that might be on the knife will stick to the steel. It sticks to metal, which is kind of neat. Okay, so now I have a sharp knife. You know, it is something that you must have, a sharp knife. If your knife isn't sharp, you will actually cut yourself worse than if you used a dull knife, because you'll be exerting more force. So you will cut yourself a little worse. So now I'm going to show you a little bit about how to use a knife. I've been using a knife for a long time. I feel really comfortable using a knife. It's not something that you can learn instantly. It takes practice. So one of the exercises we give our students to do is to try to cut a piece of celery into 1,000 pieces. Now, obviously, that would be difficult, but that is the exercise. and it may or may not work out. So whenever I chop, I take these two fingers and then put my thumb behind those two fingers so I can't cut my thumb. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my middle finger as a guide for the knife, and I'm never going to lift the knife above the knuckle. So I'm going to set my fingers up. I'm going to keep putting that thumb behind my first finger, and then I'm going to do my best to cut this celery into 1,000 slices. So what I'm doing is I'm not actually sawing, I'm not chopping, I'm rocking the knife this way. You see some cooks like to use a knife this way, and it's good, but most of the time it doesn't cut all the way through the celery, and it makes a lot of unnecessary noise. So the quiet, conscientious chef works this way, and you can see I'm riding the knife up and down this middle finger, not going above the knuckle, because I might cut myself, but you can see how I'm getting nice, even, about the same size, as thin as humanly possible pieces, which is the idea of this exercise. I always liked cutting celery this way because it's like the Star Trek insignia. But you can cut celery any way you like. If you were going to make soup, you might cut it a little thicker, or you might even cut this celery in half and then dice it like so. But every time I use a knife, when I get close to the end, I bring my fingers up against the knife and use it as a guide. So it's important when you use a knife to be safe. Also, it's a good idea to keep your cutting board clean. If you've already chopped some celery, there's no reason not to move it to the side of the cutting board or off the cutting board too. So in order to make a fine dice of celery, I'd cut it in half, and then I'd take each half and try to cut it into as many pieces as I can, and then line them up. If I was going to do a whole bunch, I'd cut every piece into this same format, line them all up just like I did before with my fingers, and then just cut same way, fast as I can, just because I was always taught to cut like someone's chasing you. But before you can actually feel comfortable cutting, you have to practice. Another thing, a nice cutting board. This particular cutting board has built-in stoppers, so you don't need to put anything underneath it to keep it from sliding along. So we've got some celery cut. When we come back, we're going to make some vegetable soup, and we'll show you how.
Traditional light bulbs actually generate 9 times more heat than light. Switch to Energy Star light bulbs, and you'll realize just how much cash you are really burning through. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Ready or not, here I come.
Take time to be a dad today.
Daddy, I'm gonna find you.
Hi, welcome back to Reiver Recipes. I'm Gene. We're making soup today. And before we can make soup, we need a good stock. And to make a good stock, you need bones. For soups, most soups we use chicken stock. So a quick stock recipe, if you took about 1/3 of the pot in bones, filled it up with cold water, brought it to a simmer, skimmed all the coagulated blood off the top, and added carrots, onions, and celery, a little bit of thyme, bay leaf, peppercorns. Put that in there, simmer it for 4 to 6 hours, makes a beautiful chicken stock, which is God's own potpourri. Makes your whole house smell great. So what I've done so far now is I have a little butter that I'm melting in the pot. I only want to put enough butter to saute the garlic and the vegetables in, because if I put too much, it'll all come to the top of the soup. So I have a little butter melted. The first thing I'm going to put in the pot is some freshly chopped garlic. Garlic is the one thing that you can chop in a food processor and it doesn't really affect how it is. With the garlic, I'm going to put in some freshly chopped parsley. And then I have a little pepper mill here. I like to use fresh cracked pepper. I'm going to put that in there. And then I want to saute the garlic a little bit, but I don't want it to burn, so it's not going to take very long. Typically, whether I'm cooking soup or anything else, I like to have the flame as high as possible. Something else I did was I heated my chicken stock ahead of time to make the soup go a little bit faster. So I want to thank Andrew for chopping the vegetables for the soup, somebody from my soup and sauce class. But in this container, we have onions, carrots, celery, mushrooms, and peppers, and then some diced tomatoes on top for our soup. You can put any vegetables you want. One thing about vegetable soup is it's going to be better the day after you make it than the day you make it. There's no way around that. So good idea to make it a day ahead of time. So once my garlic is sauteed, I love that sound. Let's climb into the pot. You hear that? Okay, so I'm going to add the vegetables. And one thing about the vegetables is once they cook, they're going to kind of reduce in size. So if the pot seems like it's halfway full of vegetables or a little more, that's totally natural. I'm going to get a spoon to stir it with. Whenever I cook, I like to keep a towel folded 4 ways in my hand and assume that everything is hot. So now, one of the most key elements of making soup is we would like very much to let the flavors come alive in the soup. That's why we don't add the stock yet. We want to build layers of flavor. So before we add the stock, we're going to saute the vegetables until they're almost done before we add the stock. So far, we have garlic, parsley, some pepper, a little bit of butter, and the vegetables, and they're cooking right now. We're also today going to make a pumpkin soup. And some people say, pumpkin soup? But yes, pumpkin soup, because if you think about it, pumpkin is just a squash. So really, it's like a squash soup. And pumpkin, as well as being something that's good sweet, it is excellent when it's savory. So we're going to make a little pumpkin soup. In order to thicken the pumpkin soup, and just about any cream soup, you have some options, but today we're going to make what's called roux. And roux is some kind of fat mixed with flour. This particular roux is going to be margarine and flour. You could use bacon fat as part of your roux and put some bacon flavor into your soup without actually using bacon, which is kind of nice. So I've already melted the margarine. I want to get a small whip. One of the things I try to emphasize to my students is the right tool for the right job. For instance, this job, you wouldn't want a whip this big. You just want a little tiny whip like this. So the standard recipe for roux is 1 part margarine, butter, any kind of fat. And fat isn't a bad word, it's a good word. As Julia Child said, you need fat in your diet to digest your vitamins, so don't be worried about it. So I have 1.25 the amount of flour as I do fat, because I need a little more than straight up one-on-one. I'm going to put the flour in there, and then I'm going to mix it together. I like my roux to be kind of somewhat stiff, but not too stiff. Especially in this case, we would like it to work a little faster and to thicken our soup a little more quickly. So we're going to make it a little more liquidy than I normally would. I might normally put a little bit more flour in, but for this purpose, to make it fast, I'm going to put it in the oven now. I have the oven at 350 degrees in a convection, and I'm going to cook it in there for as long as I possibly can before the next segment. So right now, we're going to go back to this soup right here. We're going to stir it up a little bit. You can see now, smoke is starting to come out. If you were in this room, you could tell the smell is great. Something else I have here that I might as well add, because I don't need all of it for later, I have some fresh basil. So I'm actually going to put some basil in my soup too, since I have some. You can put whatever herbs you want, but I have some basil here. I don't need a whole lot for the soup. I want to save this for something I'm going to do later. But I'm going to take the basil and I'm going to cut it what's called chiffonade. These little stems, if you're making pesto, you can put them in your pesto. You might not necessarily want to put them in your soup. You know, I might actually save them and chew on those to freshen my breath. So I'm going to take the leaves and roll them up, and I'm going to do a cut that's called chiffonade, which is thin little strips of basil. You know, and you could leave them like this if you like, but I'm going to take the knife, and whenever you're chopping anything, and I'll put a little parsley in here too, just so I can show you what I mean, I use the knife in a way like this. I hold it with this hand, and then use it like this to chop herbs and things that I want chopped small, just like so. And then I'll use the knife as a spatula and just drop it in there. Okay, so at the same time now, like I said, I also want to make pumpkin soup. So I want to make sure I get my ingredients sauteing. Find my pot. the proper sized pot. I'm gonna try this recipe for the pumpkin soup will make about 3 gallons. You know, I don't necessarily like to make soup unless I'm gonna make enough for a few people. It's hard to make soup for one. The great thing about most soups, especially brothy soups like the vegetable soup, they freeze really well. Even chicken stock, if you make a big pot of chicken stock, you can divide it into smaller pieces and freeze that. And when you want to make a soup, just pull the stock out of the freezer. So just like our other soup, this time I'm going to put a little bit more butter in because we're going to make a creamy soup. And at the end, we're actually going to blend it and strain it. So I could use a little more butter for this. So we're going to melt the butter. We're going to add some garlic. And then I'm going to put some vegetables in. And then we're going to continue with our pumpkin soup when we return right after this.
Live with a human for a while, and you get to know a few things. Like, I know she's actually not a morning person. I know she does strange tricks for no treats. I know that water makes her howl like crazy. I even know how the floor stays so clean. She's quick. But the one thing I will never for the life of me know is how she gets so tiny and inside that box. Natalie, how do you get so tiny?
That's low. That's low and below the top. Seriously.
Hi, I'm Gene. Welcome back to Reiver Recipes. I wish you could be here right now, or I wish you had smell-o-vision, because it smells really good in here right now. All the vegetables here for our vegetable soup are starting to saute. You can see here, in this pot, I have put some celery, onions, and carrots with garlic and parsley. And I want to saute those first. Anytime I make a cream soup, I like to saute the onions and celery first, because at first, they have almost like a sulfury smell and a sulfury kind of flavor. So we cook those a little bit to get that flavor out of there. And then we have a carved pumpkin, which we saved the insides of, the squashy part, and also the stringy stuff. The orange, gooey, stringy stuff, that's the real goods. So in my household, when the season comes around, I usually carve 2 pumpkins, one happy, one scary. And then I take the insides of both pumpkins and make pumpkin soup. So I put the pumpkin innards in there. And you can see everything sauteing nicely. I don't see any problem using the same spoon here. Worst case scenario, we get a little pumpkin flavor in our vegetable soup. So this soup smells great. I have some chicken stock, which I already heated up to speed up the process. We told you a little bit about how to make chicken stock. I think everyone should have chicken stock in their household. Something I do, and this is just my own preference, whenever I make soup, when I add the stock, I like to add salt then. So this way, if I'm doing 16 different things at once, when I put the stock in, I put in the salt, so then later on, I'm not wondering if I put in the salt. So, salt has gotten a bad reputation, but it can really bring out the flavor in food. And in order to season your soup properly, you're gonna have to put more salt in there than you might think. So I'm not gonna over-season it now. I might adjust the seasoning later, but I'm gonna put what you would have to call a generous amount of salt into that soup. A little too much there, and you see I poured it into my hand first so I could take some back. So instead of trying to put it back in there, I'm just gonna throw it into the other soup because I'm gonna have to put salt in there eventually. I'm gonna stir this up a little bit. Now, this soup here, the vegetable soup, you don't have to do anything else to it but let it cook. You wanna let it boil until the vegetables become soft, and then it'll be ready. And like I said, if you can cool it off and heat it up again tomorrow, it'll be even better. This soup, it's slightly more complicated, I suppose, but I'm gonna take There's that stuff I'm talking about, the goods, as we call it. We put that in there. And then I'm gonna take the chicken stock that I have here. Once again, it's warm. It boiled earlier. And then what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna go about 3 inches over the top of the pumpkin pulp that I have in the pot, because I wanna leave room so we can actually make it into a soup. Something that helps an awful lot when you want something to boil is if you cover it up. So we're gonna cover that up. We want it to come to a boil before we add our roux. Our roux, oh my goodness, it's probably done. Let's go to the oven and see. It looks perfect. You could see here, it cooked a little. You know, it's got a little bit of cooking, but it didn't really take on any color. What we're making here is a blonde roux or a pale roux. We don't want it to have any color, because if it does, that will affect the flavor. We want to thicken the soup without imparting too much flavor from the roux. One thing about when you use roux, after you add it to your soup, you have to simmer the soup for 12 to 15 minutes in order for the taste of the flour to be cooked out. The taste of the flour will never be totally cooked out, but if you wait 12 minutes, you'll hardly taste the flour. So there are other ways to thicken this soup. You could just use the pumpkin pulp itself to thicken the soup. Some people might use rice or potatoes to thicken a cream soup. The one thing you never want to use, cornstarch to thicken anything with cream in it, because then it kind of turns into wallpaper paste. But you can use rice, you can use all kinds of things. Cornstarch should be more or less for a clear soup. If you wanted to make this vegetable soup into something a little more Asian, like hot and sour soup, you could just add white pepper and vinegar, and then maybe mix a little cornstarch with cold water and thicken it just slightly, and you'd have yourself a hot and sour soup. Oh yeah, this soup smells fantastic. And because we did take the time to heat the stock, we'll be able to make the soup a little faster. Even this soup right here, you can see that it's almost coming to a boil. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But it's almost coming to a boil because we used hot stock. This same concept can be used for any cream soup. Whatever kind of cream soup you want to make, whether it's broccoli, potato, or anything, you follow the same steps. This soup, I put carrots in because it's naturally orange. If I was making a potato soup, I might not put carrots. I might just use celery, onions, and potatoes. Follow the same concept. Put a little butter, some garlic, some parsley maybe. Celery and onions first, like I said. Saute them until they get a little soft. Then add your potatoes, pumpkin, whatever, and then cover it with stock. Depending on how thick you want the soup to be, that would depend on how much stock you'd put in there. So this particular soup, we want it to be thick but not too thick. We're going to use mostly the pulp of the pumpkin to thicken it, but we're also going to add a little bit of roux. Sometimes when you make a soup like a potato soup, if you just use potatoes to thicken it and you store it, all the potatoes end up in the bottom of the soup. So by adding a little bit of roux, even to a potato soup, it'll make it a little more pleasant viscosity throughout. So the old adage is true. A watched pot does never boil. So I'm not looking at it because I want it to boil. We will go back to the vegetable soup. It's looking pretty good. One of the things I recommend is that you never fill up your pots too high, because once they boil, it might end up all over the stove. That's something to be careful about with a cream soup. If you put cream in it, it might have a tendency to come over the top when it comes to a boil. So we're going to be careful with that. So I don't know about you, but I can't wait any longer. So we talked about earlier about the right tool for the right job. So for this particular job, this is a better whisk to use in order to add the roux to this soup, as opposed to the small one we use to make the roux. So what I'm going to do is stir it up a little bit, and then into this roux, I used a pound of margarine, and I also used a pound and a quarter of flour. So I'm going to put the roux in there, half at a time. I'm going to kind of mix it up in there. I'm going to put all the roux in there. I'm going to mix it in really well. And you know what? I think we'll take a break, and when we come back, the soup will be done. So we'll see in a minute.
Ever wonder what makes us, the Smurfs, so happy? The forest, of course. This is where we, along with the beautiful forest creatures, make our home with beautiful plant life, clean water, and endless adventures. It's a place to celebrate. So discover the forest with your family today. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Here's to the things that can keep us safe. Those we use all the time with hardly a thought. Those that are silently standing by to save our lives. And now, those that we carry with us everywhere we go. Many mobile devices will now bring you wireless emergency alerts, real-time information directly from local sources you know and trust. With the unique sound and vibration, you'll be in the know wherever you are.
Hi, we're back again for the end of the show. We'd like to thank you for joining us. I want to thank the people in food service for donating some of this food, even though they don't know it. Don't tell them. And also the people from CB17 for putting this together. Our vegetable soup is just about to boil. We want to let it boil for 10 minutes or so. We have our pureed soup. In order to puree a soup, one of the greatest cooking inventions in centuries, the handheld blender. So I've cooked the squash in the soup, and then I'm just gonna blend all the vegetables and the pumpkin pulp together. It's been slightly thickened by the roux. Takes a little while to get it to mix totally well. The roux, the vegetables, and the pumpkin pulp will make a beautiful puree, which, at some point or another, I'm going to strain through this. This is called a china cap, or a chinois, or a strainer. If you don't have one of these, you could use a spaghetti strainer just as well, or some people even blend the soup and don't even strain it if that's what you want to do. It's your soup. You can do whatever you want. Best thing about soup is it helps to restore your health. Chicken stock has been scientifically proven to help to cure the common cold. So, good luck in your soup making and in your life. We'll see you next time on Reiver Recipes. Thanks for joining us.